Imagine waking up one day and almost every major civilization you know is gone, right? The greatest cities are burning, kings disappear, trade stops, entire kingdoms vanish from history, people flee their homes, and for generations, nobody really knows why. It sounds like the plot of a movie, right? But this actually happened around 3,200 years ago, something triggered one of the greatest collapses in human history. In just a few decades, powerful empires that had stood for centuries either fell apart or were never the same again. Historians call it the Bronze Age collapse, and even today, it's one of the history's biggest mysteries. So what really happened? Let's find out, right? To understand how shocking this collapse was, we first have to understand how connected the ancient world had become. Long before the internet, long before airplanes, even long before the Roman Empire, ancient civilizations were already trading with one another. The kingdoms of ancient Egypt, the Hittite Empire, the Mycenaean Greeks, and powerful cities across the eastern Mediterranean exchanged goods every day. Copper came from one region. Tin came from another. Luxury goods traveled across the sea. Ideas spread between centuries. Letters were exchanged between kings. It was one of the first truly international systems in history. In many ways, the Bronze Age world was surprisingly global. One metal connected almost everything: bronze. It was used to make swords, armor, axes, tools, farming equipment, even works of art. But there was one problem. Bronze isn't found naturally. You have to combine copper with tin. And those materials often came from completely different places. That meant kingdoms depended on long-distance trade. If one trade route was interrupted, everyone felt the impact. Sound familiar to you? Even today, when supply chains break down, factories slow. Prices rise, products disappear. The ancient world faced a similar challenge. Only the consequences were far more severe, right? Then something changed, right? Beginning around 1200 BCE, city after city began to fall. Some were burned to the ground, others were abandoned. Trade nearly stopped. Writing disappeared in some regions. Entire royal families vanished. The mighty Hittite Empire, gone. Many Mycenaean palace centers destroyed. Cities along the eastern Mediterranean suffered repeated attacks and destruction. It was as if the ancient world was unraveling all at once. Naturally, historians have spent generations trying to answer one question: why? The truth is, there probably wasn't just one cause. Instead, many different problems may have happened at the same time, and together, they created the perfect storm. One possibility is climate change. Evidence from tree rings, lake sediments, and other scientific studies suggest that parts of the eastern Mediterranean experienced long periods of drought around this time. Imagine years without enough rain. Harvest fails, food becomes scarce, prices rise, people grow desperate. When entire populations struggle to eat, conflict becomes much more likely. A hungry kingdom is rarely a stable kingdom, right? Another possibility: earthquakes, right? The eastern Mediterranean sits near several major fault lines. Some researchers believe a series of powerful earthquakes may have damaged cities across the region. Imagine rebuilding after one disaster, only to be struck again. Walls collapse, temples fall, roads become unusable. Courts are damaged, trade slows even further. While earthquakes alone probably don't explain everything, they may have added to the growing crisis. Then there's one of history's most mysterious groups, the so-called Sea Peoples. Ancient Egyptian records describe foreign groups arriving by both land and sea. Some attack coastal cities, others simply evade Egypt itself. Under Ramesses II, Egypt managed to defeat them in a famous battle. But here's the mystery: who's exactly were the Sea Peoples? No one knows for certain. Were they pirates? Refugees fleeing famine? Displaced soldiers? Entire families searching for new homes? Or perhaps several different groups moving at the same time? Even today, the true identity remains one of the archaeology's greatest puzzles, right? Internal political problems may have made everything even worse. Large empires often become complicated to govern. Corruption grows, local leaders compete for power, taxes increase, people become dissatisfied. When outside threats appear, governments are already weakened from within, struggle to respond. History's shown us this pattern again and again. Most civilizations don't collapse because of one single event. They weaken little by little, until one final crisis pushes them over the edge. One of the most fascinating parts of the Bronze Age collapse is how quickly knowledge disappeared. In some places, writing systems stopped being used, Skilled craftsmen vanished. Large construction projects ended. International diplomacy broke down. It wasn't just cities that disappeared. Entire ways of life disappeared with them. For generations afterward, people remembered these powerful kings among almost like legends. Imagine future historians trying to understand our world if most books, computers, and records suddenly vanish. That's the challenge archaeologists face today. They're rebuilding history from broken pottery, damaged buildings, inscriptions, and scattered clues. But not every civilization disappeared. Egypt survived. Although it emerged weaker than before, some smaller communities adapted. New kingdoms eventually rose from the ashes. History didn't end, it changed. The collapse cleared the way for new civilizations, new technologies, and new political systems to emerge. Sometimes the end of one era becomes the beginning of another. So what can we learn from all this? The Bronze Age collapse reminds us that even the most powerful civilizations can be vulnerable. Strong armies aren't always enough. Wealth isn't always enough. Technology isn't always enough. When trade breaks down, when food becomes scarce, when disasters strike, when governments struggle, even great empires can fall. It's a lesson that still feels surprisingly modern, right? Perhaps that's why historians remain so fascinated by this period. Not because we know all the answers, but because we don't. And every archaeological discovery adds another piece to the puzzle. Every ancient inscription reveals another clue. And every excavation brings us one step closer to understanding what happened more than 3,000 years ago. The Bronze Age collapse wasn't just the fall of a few kingdoms. It was one of the greatest turning points in human history. A moment when the interconnected world suddenly came apart and forced humanity to start building again. If you enjoyed this video, man, subscribe. Every week we uncover forgotten civilizations, ancient mysteries, and the incredible moments that changed the course of history. Until next time, man, stay curious, man.